My hand reaches out and fumbles at the bedside table as that noise increases. Pema Chodron's book, When Things Fall Apart, tips off the bedside table. Things are falling apart in this pandemic. So many lives have been lost. Everyone's life is in chaos. Lost jobs, lost access to loved ones, parents pushed beyond limits, children longing for school, people longing to be touched. We are so starved for human interaction that we have taken to constantly reformulating our risk assessment just to give ourselves a touch of the relief we need so badly. The noise continues to rise. My fumbling at the bedside continues. There go the half-built Lego and Duplo sets that amused the kids for 15 whole minutes while David and I worked last evening. There go the pile of books I'm reading as part of my effort to become anti-racist. The names George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and Daniel Prude come to my heart. People of color and the pain they are living with right now comes to my conscious thoughts, and this is followed quickly by guilt for the systems that I have been a part of perpetuating while believing myself to be not racist. The volume of the alarm continues to rise. My fumbling continues more frantic. Things are flying. My awareness of multiple ongoing crises and chaos rush like gale force winds across my consciousness as each new item falls to the floor. My hand finally finds my phone. It reads 6:31 a.m. All that, and I've been awake for a minute. As I lift myself further out of the fog of sleep and walk to the fridge for the first cup of cold coffee, the words of this morning's creation story come to mind. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et ha'aretz, v'ha'aretz hayita tohu v'vohu, v'choshech al panei tehom, v'ruach Elohim merachefet al panei hamayim. Genesis tells us when God began to create heaven and the earth and the whole world being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God sweeping over the water. I used to hear those voices and imagine a kind of placid scene, sort of the bluish, grayish world, like the horizon on a beach day, when you can't quite tell where the water ends and the sky begins. But this year, when I hear those words of creation, it is through the lens of the chaos we are living in. And then I take my first sip of fridge cold, perfectly bitter dark coffee. And I remember. Next comes the light. And the light is good. No, I'm not giving you a sermon on my caffeine dependency, although I could. Rather, the science of mindfulness teaches us that when we take the time to notice the resources we carry, we become better equipped to use them, and it's helpful. And so I want to speak to you about how we who are participating in this marvelous tradition of Rosh Hashanah are empowered to experience chaos and still believe that we are part of a creative act. Chaos can be a part of creation. We are inheritors of a tradition which gives us a practice to approach this very moment without being swept away by it. So let's return to my early morning debacle and see what our tradition might offer to help me plant my feet more firmly on the ground. I inspect my experience not because I assume it is yours. In fact, I know it's not. But perhaps it can serve as a useful model for the storm you find yourself in. Bereshit, in the beginning of my family's story in America, this country was a haven for my white Jewish great-grandparents who came here as early as the 1880s. In spite of their poverty, my great-grandparents sent my grandparents to free, safe public schools. Those grandparents received free college education and graduate degrees in repayment for their service to this country in World War II. My mother chose between free city college or $50 of tuition per semester at the state university. In every generation, my white Jewish ancestors were able to leverage themselves into better paid careers and more affluent neighborhoods. Because of this, my grandparents were able to save and pass that savings on to my parents as wealth. This wealth will ultimately pass down to me. This is a lucky course for a white family who has lived over 100 years of American history. Part of the chaos, the tohu vavohu, the windstorm we are experiencing in this moment is rooted in the fact that when we look at this trajectory over the last 100 years, it is far less likely for a Black family. Studies done by the Brookings Institute indicate that white families have, on average, more than 10 times the wealth of Black families. The call of this moment, the shofar sound, is to finally acknowledge that American society does not afford equal opportunity to all of its citizens, despite its claims to do so. We need to recognize that the problem isn't just in individual bias, it's in the systems. And those systems need to be uprooted now. Changing systems means addressing some of the most deeply embedded structures of American society. The funding of public education, segregated housing, the reliance on private companies to provide access to health care, the criminalization of poverty, and mass incarceration, all of which take disproportionate toll on Black and brown lives. Changing the systems that perpetuate racism means introducing more of the unknown into all lives, living in the discomfort of not knowing the answer to how, while acknowledging we must. It means all Americans, including white Americans, must enter the tohu vavohu, the chaos, instead of leaving people of color there alone. Rosh Hashanah is a day in which we are invited to conceive of the pain we are experiencing differently. Hayom harat ha'olam, the tradition teaches. Today, the world is born anew. Valerie Kaur, activist and filmmaker, invites us to consider if the darkness of this moment is not the darkness of the tomb, but the darkness of the womb? What if we consider the larger society's entrance into the tohu vavohu as our experience of the birth pangs of a different and more equitable world? Reform Judaism teaches that we are a part of an unfolding creation story, tasked with the sacred work of tikkun olam, of healing the world. Ibram Kendi teaches that being an anti-racist is a never completed task. Being anti-racist is waking up each day and beginning again from wherever you are. The late Congressman John Lewis called upon us to see this year as the year we are required to redeem the soul of the nation. On Rosh Hashanah, we acknowledge that all of that work is one and the same. And so, I carry my cup of coffee back to the bedroom, and I examine the chaotic bedside scene. I am aware of the work that must be done. I can feel the pain of this moment, but I am not overcome by it. Instead, I bend over to start picking up the books and the Legos from the floor. In 5781, I prepare to begin again.